very much, everybody, for joining us this morning. It's our pleasure, and I've got my friend and colleague, Malcolm Turnbull, who in many respects has led the charge not just within the coalition over many years on this issue this morning, the information and communications technology area, but has in many ways inspired a lot of people, I think, throughout Australia, and is a leading thinker and advocate for so much of what's happening in this space. This morning we'd like to release the policy. I just in many ways will introduce Malcolm, but also give you a sense of the role of finance. There is a mutual responsibility within the opposition, and if we get the privilege of government on the weekend, finance does have a role, but the principal role in an Abbott government in this area will be led by the Minister for Communications, Malcolm Turnbull. So, in many ways, could I just firstly acknowledge the York Butter Factory organisation and all of those who are involved in it. This is quite an inspirational 30 minutes we've had before we've got on our feet here this morning. It's some wonderful stuff. This is really an innovation hub. It is. I've looked at the incubators and others around the world, in Israel and the US and other countries, and this captures so much of the success of other innovation hubs, and it's, as I say, a great inspiration to be here this morning and talk to some of those who are involved with all sorts of projects. This is the most dynamic area of every economy at the moment, the ICT space. And I know at the turn of the century, I ran a nationwide data engineering company, Axiom, and it was part of a big $2 billion a year US business. And I was blown away with the technology back then. In fact, it's now so much of it is redundant. When I go back and see former colleagues and visit the US and see what they're up to, just in the space of 12 or 13 years, there's just no comparison with what was happening back then, and that's public policy has to reflect that. The way in which government is involved, it's really got to allow the freedom, if you like, for inspiration and ingenuity and innovation to blossom, and not try and constrain and put parameters around the development in this space, because so much is happening. And we are slipping very badly as a country in terms of our uptake of ICT and the associated technology. Finance, on the role of finance, finance's role in this space in a government sense is more as sort of an internal auditor, if you like. Our job is to ensure that we've got financial integrity with what is a $6 billion spend each and every year, $6 billion that the federal government is spending. So a very important role to make sure that what's being done is sensible and not wasteful. But at the same time, it's tricky because government should be showing strong leadership in this space, and but that's got to complement that dynamism that's out there. So, but the most important role will be to, I think, in a cultural sense, change much of the federal public service in their attitude towards ICT. That job will overwhelmingly be the responsibility of Malcolm Turnbull, and at this stage I'll hand over to Malcolm, who's done a very large part of the work in this document, he and his team, and I think it's quite an exciting vision for Australia and for federal government involvement and leadership in the whole ICT space. Thanks, Malcolm.
Okay, well, thanks, Andrew. Thank you very much. And it's great to be here in the York Butter Factory, as Andrew said, because this is the type of collaborative working place where people, where entrepreneurs, innovators are able to come up with their new ideas, discuss them, engage, interact, and we've seen some terrific Australian innovations, not just for the private sector, but also for government services here already. and it's wonderful to be joined by so many innovators here, and it's also good to be joined by our colleagues Josh Frydenberg, Kelly O'Dwyer and Senator Helen Kroger as well. Now, we recognise that the single most important challenge for Australia is how do we remain competitive and prosperous and strong in a much more competitive world, in a globalising world, where developing countries that used to compete for low-wage, low-skilled jobs are now competing for high-wage, high-skilled jobs in our country, but doing them for lower wages there. This is the process of convergence, all amplified by the role of the internet. So many jobs and industries that we all regarded as not being trade exposed a few years ago now are. The key is better use of information and communications technology. Now, government can't do everything, but it can and it must lead. And in this document, we set out a range of important policy measures that will supercharge Australian government's role in the economy, in the digital economy of the 21st century. Key objectives include ensuring that as far as possible, virtually all government interactions with the public are able to be conducted digitally by 2017, using video conferencing, using the web, using apps, using smartphones, being indifferent to the type of device, agnostic about devices, but ensuring that Australians can deal and engage with their governments as efficiently as possible. We will ensure that all Australians, individuals and businesses, have, if they wish, access to a completely free digital mailbox, but I used to call an electronic pigeonhole. Same concept, but the idea is that the government will say, okay, here it is, this is your unique digital mailbox, and that is where all government correspondence for you will be sent. It can never be lost, it will always be there. You can configure it to forward it on to your accountant or your other email address or whatever you like, but it's always going to be there. We will make it available to state and local governments for free. We want this to be taken up. This is a huge productivity driver. I've always found free is a very compelling selling proposition. And so we would aim to be at a point where a business, which is dealing with governments all the time, federal, state and local, will know that there is one place where all of that communication will be directed. It will be theirs forever. It will be secure. It will be properly encrypted. And of course, the savings to government are gigantic. Naturally, you think of all the trees that will still be happily growing in the forest, not being turned into paper. There's a lot of work's been done. There's some good foundations for this already in the government with the MyGov application, and also, of course, what Australia Post has done with its digital mailbox. This has been a passion of mine for a very long time. We have to drive greater digital engagement. Now, right across government, we want to change the culture. As Andrew said, a critical thing is leadership. It's not just a question of saving money, saving some of that $6 billion budget. That's pretty important, very important. But it's also a question of changing the culture to one of innovation, to one where public servants are able to experiment, where they are encouraged, and their departments and their leaders are encouraged to try new applications. In the digital world, experimentation has never been easier. The price of non-success, I don't like the word failure, but the price of not succeeding, of a new application not working, is not that high, and you learn so much from it. We need to have more of the culture of the York Butter Factory in Canberra and less of the old, very risk-averse, not invented here approach. We're going to drive very aggressively a cloud-first strategy. It is critical to, if you like, challenge the box huggers and move as much as we can services into the cloud. There are so many economies and efficiencies arise from that. That will enable all departments to work more productively. We're going to ensure that the next edition of the National Digital Economy Strategy is one that is developed collaboratively with the states and territories and, of course, with the private sector. It staggers me, as somebody who's worked in global businesses in the past, to see how little engagement and interaction and understanding of what is happening in other jurisdictions, including other state jurisdictions in Australia, is to be found in Canberra. We need to be much more open-minded, and our approach to ICT will be much more open-minded and much more receptive to new ideas. This is actually the most exciting part of the whole digital economy issue. You know, for 6 years, Labor has been hammering on about the NBN and what is in truth a very narrow technical issue as to whether all premises should be connected with fibre optic cables or a lesser proportion. You know, whether, as we would say, 20% or thereabouts can be cost effectively connected, and the balance can be more cost effectively and quickly done with different technologies. That's essentially a technical debate. It's about the pipes. The real issue is, what are you going to put through the pipes? What are you going to do with it? As I've said many times, we don't have a shortage of technology. What we have is a shortage of technological imagination. Now, we are, as Liberals, Andrew and I and my colleagues here, are very aware of the limits of government. But what we can do is provide examples of genuine, innovative, imaginative digital engagement at the government level, and also, hopefully, better engage the private sector. And you'll see in our policy document bringing the private sector in to consult with the government, as some of the states have done. There's a lot to be learned outside of Canberra, and ensuring that you get better interaction and shared experiences. Now, let me just make one final point. This is all about our positive agenda for the future, but it would be remiss of me not to draw your attention to some very important examples of Labor's failure. Labor has talked endlessly about the National Broadband Network, but as you'll see in the document, in our policy document, the reality is that our relative ranking by digital economy measures has in fact declined under Labor's time in office. If you look at the World Economic Forum's Global Information Technology Index, which measures our readiness to absorb and use ICT, we were ranked 9th in 2004, 18th in 2012. According to the International Telecommunications ICT Development Index, Australia was ranked 15th in 2007, 21st in 2012. Uniquely among OECD members, the share of Australians using the internet for their most recent interaction with government fell between 2009 and 2011. I could go on. For example, Akamai's recent State of the Internet report found Australia had fallen to 40th place in the league table of actual download speeds. Our ranking has been slipping since 2008. So billions spent on the NBN, so little achieved, and the consequence has been in those figures. You see, the key thing with internet connectivity is to ensure that everybody has it, and that they have it soon, and they have it in an affordable way, and it is delivered in a manner that is cost effective from a taxpayer point of view as well. But all of that is going to require a much more innovative culture to exploit it, and that is one of the reasons we're here in the York Butter Factory, because this epitomises the creative cultural atmosphere, the mindset that we want to engender in Canberra. And as you've seen, we have some practical proposals that will, in our view, make Canberra, the federal government, much more efficient, enable states and local governments to engage much more efficiently, and of course enable us, as part of our overall objective, to reduce the cost of regulation and red tape on business by at least $1 billion a year. So that's an introduction to our policy. I commend it to you, and we'd be happy to take some questions.
Tony Abbott, your leader, has been criticised of late for his analysis of a serious situation, baddies versus baddies. Do you think that kind of lightweight look at that situation is suitable for a potential Prime Minister?
I don't think it's lightweight at all. I think I think what Tony was saying in a very accessible way was really no more than what most, or pretty much all analysts of the area have said for years, which is that the one thing in the Middle East that is not in scarce supply is bad options.
So is that how you describe the civil war there, baddies versus baddies?
Well, everyone uses different choice of words, but the idea that you have a regime that is that is obviously a cruel, inhumane, dictatorial regime. That's no doubt about that. And its opponents are somehow or other the most virtuous and pure freedom fighters on the other is naive. It is a. I mean, this is the problem. You've got plenty of bad options in the Middle East, and I think what Tony Abbott was doing was being very measured and very thoughtful, and he was expressing it in a way, in language that was very accessible. And if you, I can tell you the language you hear military people, world leaders, all the time talking about the good guys and the bad guys, and it's just an attempt to communicate in an accessible way. But it is important. As I said, there is no shortage of bad options in the Middle East.
In fact, Tony Abbott was in very significant company in the sense that President Obama and Prime Minister Cameron have both used the expression baddies. So to define it as baddies versus baddies is consistent with perhaps the two biggest players in this whole issue at the moment as to whether there's some military action or not.
News poll shows the coalition cruising towards a landslide victory. Do you believe the polls?
Well, I think Andrew and I both had a bit to do with polls over the years. They're accurate within the margin of error at the time they were taken, but whether it's a two-horse race, isn't it, Andrew? And I mean,
well,
anything can happen between now and Saturday.
Probably more than anyone else, Malcolm and I have been involved in deals, Malcolm more so than me, in the private sector. And the one thing I've learnt, both in the private sector and in politics, is that a deal's never done until it's done. And you think, I've seen many a company open the champagne corks 24 hours before a deal's signed, and the deal's fallen over. So we've got to take that mindset into the last week, and we have to treat every day as another critical day in maintaining. We have been in a strong position, but you can lose a strong position. That's the point.
Malcolm Turnbull, why does the coalition refuse
Sorry,
to...
Andrew, come here, mate. Yeah.
So why does the coalition continue to refuse to release its policy costings?
Perhaps I should take
Yeah,
that
you
as
should do that, yeah.
shadow finance.
Well, that's okay, Andrew Robb.
No, well, it's my portfolio responsibility. So if you like,
Can we hear from both of you?
well, possibly, I'm sure Malcolm, we're on the same page.
I'm almost
on everything.
irrepressible anyway, so it's practically impossible to stop me saying something.
Look, as we have said for so long, it makes no sense to be releasing costings that have against policies that have yet to be released. I mean, the fact of the matter is that last week we released the vast majority of our savings. The vast majority of our policies are out there. You go on the website, there's over 600 pages of policies. There's another 20 today with this policy. Every one of them has been costed. Now the savings that match those costings and in fact exceed those costings, the vast majority were put out last week, $31 billion worth of savings, and there will be final announcements on the remainder. They're only a small proportion of the total savings, so I don't think anyone's going to get any surprises this week. But oppositions and governments have historically released the final state of their books when they've released all their policies. Labor, in fact, left it until the Friday afternoon in both the 2007 election and the 2010 election. The hypocrisy of the last few weeks on this issue is palpable. It just demonstrates they can't talk about their past, and they're confused about the future. So it's just been this endless negative campaign seeking to scare people We're going to see the mother of all scare campaigns on the TV over this last few nights. We just got to weather that storm. We'll put it out in plenty of time for people to make an assessment, but we put out most of it last week.
You were quoted last week to say the policy costings would be expected early this week. I think Abbott's saying that they're expected late this week.
Well, I mean, I'd rely on what Tony Abbott says on that. He's the leader. But again, I just...
Why aren't you working closely together on this and on the same page?
Well, we work very closely together. We are in constant communication on almost every platform, digital and otherwise. But I'll just give you an example on the National Broadband Network policy. That we released our costings on that nearly 6 months ago. In early April, we released it, and the fact of the matter is that during that time, nobody from the Labor Party has been able to pick a hole in it. They say, oh, it's all, they say it's all rubbish. Then you say, okay, which of the assumptions are wrong? And tell me why it's wrong and what you think is the right assumption. They haven't been able to pick a hole in it. And it was, it went to Peter Martin, the very, distinguished economic writer for Fairfax, who went to their fact-checking site, and they accepted that all of our assumptions were very plausible, so, and reasonable ones. So, I think the Labor's sort of squeals about costings. I mean, the truth is, as Tony Abbott has said, they have never been able to get a number right to date. These are the guys that promised hundreds of times that they were going to deliver a surplus and have delivered the 5 biggest deficits in our history. I mean, they are simply not a reliable source of information on matters of finance.
So on the timing of the costings of what's left, Malcolm Turnbull is going to be late Friday afternoon.
Well,
It won't be late Friday.
Yeah.
There'll be plenty of time for people. When we've finished releasing our policies, we'll move quickly to release the final consolidated savings, costings, and the excess of savings over costings compared with our opponents.
Tens of thousands of people are pre-poll voting. Is it fair that they should have to vote without knowing the cost?
Well, they have voted knowing full well the direction we would take this country, knowing the priorities that we've got. The priorities have been out there for many months. We have demonstrated, I think, in the costings that Tony put out in his post-budget speech and in subsequent addresses. I mean, we have been more transparent than any other opposition in history. This is more comprehensive. It is just simply, much of the focus, well, excuse me, I'll just finish. Much of the focus on the costings is purely a function of the absence of anything else for our opponents to say. They are creating a straw man, and we will blow it away finally this week. But for many people, it was blown away weeks ago, and they've comfortably gone and cast their vote.
Andrew Robb here.
Oh, sorry, hang on. We went, please.
Thank you. I'd really like to ask a question about the policy.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, sure. That's few. You can ask as many questions as you like on the policy.
Thanks for coming this morning. It's really inspiring to hear you talk about the innovative culture that you see for Australia. As someone that started a tech business,
Integrity.
my motivator was around seeing that as Australians we are digital people, but that businesses have not caught up to that. So you mentioned changing culture in the government. Do you see that is going to trickle into business, so that business is more open to becoming digital, or is that a more formal partnership? How do you see that innovation, culture, narrative kind of trickle over into how businesses are going to adopt technology?
Well, I mean, Andrew and I both talked a lot about this, and we've both in our different ways and different, through our careers, had a lot to do with information technology, despite our what may appear to be great age. But I think there's a lot to be said for leadership from government. I don't believe government can tell people how to run their businesses. In fact, I have no doubt about that. But I think what you can do is lead by example. And a lot of it is a mental attitude. I mean, how many times do you see again and again established businesses reluctant to embrace digital platforms because they're worried about cannibalising their legacy business, their existing business, only to find it is cannibalised by somebody else. You know, you need to have a constantly open mind and a readiness to accept that the technological assumptions of yesterday may not work tomorrow. When we were discussing earlier, just a moment ago, Labor announced their NBN policy, and the first NBN policy, I think in March 2007, before the launch of the first iPhone. I mean, can you imagine a world without an iPhone, without smartphones, without everybody having a device in their pocket connected to the internet all the time? I think probably all of us can. There's a lot of people that can't, a lot of younger people that can't. And the reality is we need to be prepared to take almost a revolutionary approach to the way you do business, whether in government and in the corporate sector, because the alternative is you get smashed. I mean, look at the slowness of Australian retailers to take on the digital marketplace and how their business has been cannibalised by global digital players. And then, of course, there's the almost tragic tale of what's happened to Fairfax in particular. I mean, the News Limited newspapers are not far behind. It is absolutely critical to be on the front foot, innovative. Don't get hung up on what your assumptions are about doing business. The thing, if there is one thing that we should all ask ourselves, and Andrew and I and our colleagues here who hope to be in government, if we're fortunate at the election, the big question for us is, why is a country, Australia, with a non-deferential culture, but not naturally deferential, highly educated workforce, why is it that we do not generate more of our GDP from our own endogenously, internally generated intellectual property? Why don't we do more of that? I think a lot of it is attitude and culture, and I think that's something where we can genuinely lead by example. We need to inspire. We really do need to inspire Australians in government, in business, the not-for-profit sector, to be more creative and be more innovative. And what you're doing here is great.
Okay. Just add one thing to this. We're a high-cost country, and I think, for as long as all of us here are alive, we'll be a high-cost country relative to many other countries. But we're a knowledge economy. We've got very well-educated people. You would think, with those two parameters, that we would be up to the top end of digitisation adoption. If you look at all of the studies, we are now down towards the bottom of the OECD, 24 OECD countries, right? And this is to our enormous disadvantage, and in the end it translates into jobs. This is what we're losing. We're losing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs. We've got a revolution on our doorstep in terms of the middle class, explosion of the middle class. We are being beaten to the punch because we are not keeping pace on the digitisation front. Government can show enormous leadership. We can't direct, as Malcolm says, but as I go around the world the last 3 years, all of the major governments in the developed world have been aggressively opening up their public service to what Malcolm's talking about, this flexibility, the propensity to innovate and to trial things, to demonstrate to the private sector that this is important, this is a priority, this is where we've got to go to be competitive. So we can, as a government, we will as a government, show tremendous leadership, and under Malcolm's leadership with the ICT, I think we will and we must change the culture in Canberra, and that'll have an influence over the rest of the economy.
Okay, thanks guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.